Good evening, everyone. I'm really thrilled to be here and to be sharing the stage with both Malala and Shirin. And I want to begin by asking really about the process of sitting for the portraits. And I thought, because obviously at the portrait gallery, we always begin with the sitter first, and then the artist, but they're equally important, of course. I thought I should begin by asking Malala a bit about the process of sitting for this portrait, and perhaps maybe how it differs from other portraits that you've sat for.
Well, thank you so much to everyone for coming here. It's an honor to have you all here. Thank you for your time, and it was an honor to see my portrait in the National Art Gallery. This idea came, I don't know, like many months ago, when you first hear an idea that your portrait would be made and then it would be in the national, this gallery, and then you say, okay, this is really exciting, but how is it actually going to work? What is this portrait going to be like? And then I met Shirin, and in March we did this photo shoot, and it was for 2 hours. We were sitting together, and yeah, so what can I bring? How many scarves should I bring? What color? Should I wear any makeup? How should I do my hair? And I think you just said black. I said, that's so easy, no worries. So I went with black scarves, and yeah, it was easy. The photographer was, I think the photographer is here. I can't really see here, but he was great as well, and everybody in the team was just so supportive. And I enjoy being in photos. I don't like looking at the photos later, but I don't mind if somebody's taking a picture of me, so I enjoyed it.
And it was easier than sitting for a painting. We were just saying that could have taken hours of your time. This was 2 hours.
But that doesn't usually happen anymore. The painters now just take a picture and then they paint it later. Yeah. It doesn't happen anymore, but yeah, imagine that.
Now you're a busy woman. You've got things to do.
No, I'm so busy.
And then I wanted to ask Shirin a bit about the process too. And for Shirin and I, this conversation goes quite a way back. Actually, we've known each other for 12 years because I used to intern at your gallery in New York. But we met, it must have been about 2 years ago in Venice, and we began discussing the commission. And of course, you rarely undertake commissions, so this must have been quite a different proposition for you.
Yes. Well, I have to say, it was really terrifying for me because Malala is one of the people who has been most photographed. And there are amazing photographs of you. And the challenge of, how to create an image that sort of further expands on who she is and what she's doing, where she's at in her life, and whether that characterizes her in a single image or what really represents about who she is. And having 2 hours with her, I might to ask Luciano Romano, can you stand up, the photographer who actually helped me shoot the photograph. Giulia Teodoli, who is working with me. We flew from New York and Naples. He's in Italian. And we look relaxed, but actually I was quite terrified. We worked with Giulia at the studio for weeks to prepare a mood book to study. We watched movies about you, and I read all kinds of things. Of course, I knew about her. But at the end, I felt the way to go is the simplicity of really capturing the emotions of who she is, and all the force of the sense of courage and bravery that we know about Malala, but also her humanity and her fragility and anxiety as a human being, as a young woman. And I think most importantly that she's not a young girl anymore, but she's a woman. She's a young woman. And I felt that in this image, perhaps what I could do is just capture that evolution in her, and that, yes, she is a symbol, she's an important symbol for many women, and she's very courageous and brave, but she's a human being, and she's very fragile. And I think, to me, that was, then I relaxed, because I said, forget all her accomplishment and what she has received and all of that, but look at her as a human being and what she has experienced, and the sadness, the pain, yet the courage, which is really the fundamental part of who she is, and do without everything else. And I really feel at the end this one image speaks to that in terms of her beauty, the inner and outer beauty, and that I felt that it was really who she really is. And
I think you've really captured all of those things. It's really extraordinary. So we've talked a bit about the photo shoot that took place in London in March, but of course that was just the beginning of this portrait, because there were many long weeks of then inscribing this beautiful text over the image. So I want to ask Shirin about that, but also to understand the process, if the two of you agreed this text before the shoot, I mean, how much of the work was explained that there'll be the photo element and then there'll be this text written?
I think, I'm sure like Shirin has worked a lot on all this, and you followed the story and everything, but for me it just was a really smooth process. We didn't have to do much, and I personally wanted someone from our Pashtun history and our Pashto language, it's not really taught in many schools, and we speak Pashto language, but not many Pashtun people can actually write and read the language. And we have a very rich history, lots of poems, and we call it, is it called Tapa? Yeah, we call it Tapa, and this is the poetry that has, it has no poet, and these are like the poetry that we have in our this rich Pashto poetry, that it has, nobody can claim that it is mine, and it is, and it gives a message in just 2 lines, so we wanted to show that, and also we have amazing poets. So one of my father's friend and a great poet in our Pashtun area in Pakistan was Sahil, and he had written a poem on me after the attack. No, before. So before, when I was speaking out in Swat Valley, he had written this poem on me, and in this poem he is addressing the Malala Yousafzai. So he calls her the first Malala, and calls me the second Malala, and says that now you raised your voice, and now you were at a battlefield, and at that time it was a war for freedom, but through weapons. There is now another fight going on, which is for education, which is for the freedom of women, and this time another Malala is leading that battle, but she's not using guns, but she's using her voice, she's using her pen, and it was, you know, such a strong message, and so that's what the writing says.
So you chose the text?
Me and my dad.
Okay.
My dad he has been a Pashto, if you could stand up, he's a Pashto poet. He's a Pashto poet, and he had written a book as well, and yeah, but you know, poets in our culture write a lot about, like, they write love poetry, like about a dear one, and like lots of love poetry. So then as soon as my mom came into his life, my mom said, like, you can't do that anymore. Like, who is she that you're writing about? Tell me. And then, so yeah, and then he stopped. Yeah. So my mom is here as well. Yeah.
So, Shirin, I just want to ask you about this incredibly intricate and laborious process that you then undertook over many weeks of inscribing this beautiful text.
Well, first of all, I had to write in Pashto. I don't speak the language. I'm not even sure if I'm pronouncing it right, Pashto, right? Yeah. Because we speak Farsi, and luckily we have the same alphabet, but I don't quite understand all the words. And with the help of her father, I got a hold of this text, and then I exercised many times. But it was not easy, because I felt very nervous that I'm writing a language that I don't quite understand. But for me, it was quite meditative, and the truth is that in all of my work I use text, because to me the images of the woman are very silent, but the writing suggests the more emotional and intellectual strength. And for me, it's the voice, like what you said. The poetry is the voice that the image, you know, gains. And so from the beginning, I knew it had to be a poem. But I have to be honest, it took me a very long time to write this. And I'm, you know, making films and doing opera and doing this and that. But going back to the simplicity of calligraphy, it was really good for me, and I spent the summer with Malala. It took me weeks and weeks, not only this, but the second image.
The second version. It's very beautiful. I have to say, as someone whose handwriting is terrible, I'm full of awe and admiration for this. But I guess the other thing to talk about is how this fits in with your overall work, because of course this is quite similar to some of the work that really made your name, some of the kind of key images where it's a combination of a photograph and a very beautiful script. So is this something that you feel sits within that trajectory, or is it quite different because of the sitter?
I mean, for anyone who knows my work, my photography has always been about human portraits, but more so about women. And I've been always focusing on women that have been very inspirational to me and somehow been empowered within very repressive political regimes. I come from Iran, and I spend, even the films that I make are portraits, like The Woman Without Men was written by an author who was in prison for many years and has been suffering a great deal living in exile. The film I just made about Kulthum is about another legendary woman who became the biggest artist of the 20th century in the Middle East. So I seem to really focus on women that have been heroic and inspirational and a model for many other women in the Middle East, and somehow speak back to the Western culture in terms of, you know, who we are.
Yeah.
And whether we're from Pakistan or Iran or Egypt or whatever, Sunni, Shia, to me it doesn't matter. And I'm myself an artist living in exile. So it actually, your offer was a natural sort of progression in what I do, whether it's in film or in photography, which is really about portraits of women.
And there is something very cinematic about the image, not just the black and white aspect, and many of your films are also in black and white, but there's just something about it that it has a very cinematic and sort of atmospheric air to it, I think because of the inscription. It adds a layer of mystery.
Yes, I felt that, if I could say with Malala, in all of the images that I've seen of her, there is this contradiction in terms of there is this incredible sadness in her gaze, but there's incredibly empowering and a courageous gaze at the same time. And that's something I'm very interested in, because originally I started with photographing myself. And it was always about playing that role of a woman that was simultaneously living in a very oppressive regime, but also was incredibly powerful. So I really like that when I see women that have that kind of contradiction emotionally, and that I can somehow get that in the picture. And so I was lucky. I had her as perfect candidate.
And before I move on to the next topic, just two plugs, I should say. Number one is that actually Shireen and I will be in conversation here tomorrow on the stage at, I think, 5 p.m. Except it's already sold out, so hopefully if you've already got tickets, or there might be tickets. But I really want to know more about your overall work and how this sits. And the other thing to say is that the portrait is actually moving into the main hall next month, where it will be resplendent, so we're very excited about that too.
I have a question for you.
Okay.
Because, you know, like, you are kind of the lead in this, you know, how did you start thinking about this portrait?
That was my next question. That's uncanny. So I wanted to ask you, just as I referred to in the speech, when the trustees, almost 4 years ago, asked me in the interview if you could commission a portrait of any sitter by any artist, who would it be? And I said Malala by Shirin Neshat. I wanted to ask you both, and I'm not to sort of dodge the question, but I'm just very curious if for both of you, if that intuition I had was right, but also what it sort of means to you to have a portrait in this collection, and then I'll answer the question properly.
I think from one aspect, it was completely right. That was our height. We're completely the same height, so I like it. It was not somebody really tall. I saw Shireen and I said, wow, I found someone who's the same as me. And I said, it's okay, you know, we are, and you know, thank you so much. And so that made me very happy, but also I just really enjoyed it. Yes. I enjoyed it, and also I think Shireen is a passionate artist, and some people who are just professional and they are good at something, but their work and the way they do the work does not reflect passion, does not reflect how much they care about the work. But I saw that with Shireen, and also the whole team and staff and the photographer, that they just loved each and every moment, and they knew that it was not just taking a picture or making a portrait of just one individual, just one girl's face, but this was going to tell the story of many girls.
Yeah.
And in that one face, we could see the faces of many girls out there who don't have a voice.
Yeah, exactly. And Shirin?
Well, I think when you asked me, it was a big challenge because you always wonder whether you can deliver when there's an expectation, and I worried about failing you and you know, and the audience in terms of what they might see as maybe the wrong representation. But I like that, because when you're taken out of your domain and you're forced to take a risk and do something that is not what you normally do. And that's what usually I do, actually. I make films when I didn't study film. But every time you approach such a challenge with a lot of excitement, but also a lot of anxiety. And I have to say, I was anxious the way we were shooting, although maybe I didn't look it. And the day that was printed and I had to write, the day I sent you the examples that I want you to consider. But I think that doubt and the fact that you might fail your audience, yourself, you, added to me the interest of working harder, to trying to do my best. Where if I just do something that I normally do that I'm very comfortable with, maybe wouldn't demand something as this one did. But I have to say, I really spent the summer worrying about disappointing your audience, you
didn't.
Malala,
You won't.
and of course the father and the mother. And because, you know, at the end, you know, we're artists, we try to do our best, but we are not so sure whether we can do a good job and whether we can truly capture the essence who she is, as important as she is. So I was very humbled, and I took it very seriously, and I was terrified, but God is unveiled.
And shall I answer your question now?
Yes.
So the reason in the interview when I gave that answer was, really it was about the relationship between the artist and the sitter, and I think that you were such a sort of key person to depict in terms of the collection, in terms of inspiring people all around the world and what you've done. I don't want to get too sort of maudlin, so I'm not going to kind of gush too much. But just that you know, in this country, much further afield, you're hugely inspirational to many, many people. So that was a given. And then, and I never do anything, you know, for political reasons or to make a point. It just felt intuitively that you would be the right person to make that portrait. And the other thing that I think is very important is that obviously the collection, our permanent collection, is focused on British history. People that were born here, have moved here, have made an impact. But of course our artists that make those portraits, we have Holbein, we have Van Dyck, and now we have Shirin Neshat. And so the artist, we can work with the world's best artists to depict British people and British history. So that was kind of the thinking. But I just felt that it would work intuitively. It wasn't trying to force something or make a point. So hopefully that was okay.
Well, I find it extremely moving that an Iranian artist photographs a Pakistani activist and is presented at the British National Portrait Gallery. I think that says something a lot about the world, and you know, I think we need more of this to happen. And
Hear, hear.
I'm really grateful of you.
It's meant to be inspiring and inclusive, and I'm also thrilled that, for example, it will go to Birmingham next, and I'm sure it will go to many other places around the country and indeed around the world. I'm aware of time, so I just want to ask both of you about the projects that you're working on now and where you're taking both, you know, the Malala Fund and your work and the things that you're thinking about for the future.
So in Malala Fund, you know, we are focusing on the secondary education of girls, because every girl deserves to have 12 years of complete education, and most of the girls drop out of school when they reach the age of 13, 14, and it's either lack of resources, lack of investment in the secondary education, forced marriages, social norms in society. So there are various reasons, and so Malala Fund has been fighting for girls' education for the last 3-4 years, and I believe in investing in local activists and local champions, and that's the projects that we have been doing, supporting local activists who are focusing on girls' education in Pakistan, Nigeria, Brazil, the Syrian refugee region, Afghanistan, India, and we want to expand it and reach out to all, like more and more activists out there who need our support. But I also do advocacy on the global platform, not just on my own, but I involve these activists that we have. We call them Gul Makai champions, and also I invite young girls with me. So when I speak to leaders, to ask them to increase funding towards girls' education, when I ask them to focus on the education of refugee children, when I ask them to not just make promises but actually deliver it and implement them. Then I raise my voice along with all these girls, and we're already seeing outcomes. For instance, like Canada at G7, they have made a big commitment, $2.9 billion towards education, and there are lots of platforms on which we are working to ensure that we do all our best from all levels to see that day when all girls are in school and they're receiving their safe and quality education.
And are you thinking about specifically what you want to do when after you graduate, or it will just be an extension of all the work you're doing now?
Well, the work is still happening, and I do the Malala Fund work. But when it comes to the college time, like it's 2 months I have 3 terms, each term is two months, and that's kind of a break for me because I want to then focus on my studies. Actually, my college was supposed to start today.
Sorry.
It's okay. It's okay. So I'll be back tomorrow. But I'm studying PPE, which is Philosophy, Politics, and Economics, and it's a 3 years course. I've finished my first year. I passed it, and nearly. And then so 2 years left, and I think it's the first time that I'm engaging with people of my age, and it's just, there's so much to learn from them. And after that, I don't have any idea in terms of like profession and what I want to do. If there's any job at this gallery, let me know. I don't know if I can become an artist, not as good as you, but I could take some lessons. But I want to continue the work for Malala Fund, and that's for girls' education.
And Shirin, can I ask you the same question about the project?
I cannot follow what she said.
It's not a competition, we're all doing different things.
You've already done amazing.
I'm just making, no, actually, I'm an artist. I'm actually involved in making a new film, which also would be an artwork as well. And it's really, for the first time, about an Iranian in America. It's a kind of a political satire, social critique of American culture today, but from the perspective of Iranian and how this country is evolving, and the image of America and as a dream. It's called Dreamland. But it takes me like another year or so, but yeah, nothing as significant as this, but more artwork, more film-based work.
Fantastic. And then the final question I want to ask both of you is, not to put you on the spot, but if you could commission a portrait of anyone for this collection, can you think of someone you'd want to nominate or see on our walls?
Sure.
I'm looking for good ideas.
People, sitters, or you mean the sitters?
Yeah, or if you can think of artists that you feel...
Oh God, I have to think of it right now.
Sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot. But
yeah, there are so many candidates from so many different parts of the world. I think, I don't know. What about you?
Same, like so some of the people who I was thinking of like have passed away, and like in our Pashtun history, we had great poets and great leaders, from Bacha Khan, who's known as the Gandhi of Pashtuns, and also Ghani Khan, who's this amazing great poet in our whole history. So maybe them, but they're no more. Asma Jahangir, she also passed away this year. She was a great human rights activist. But if I'm going to choose someone who is, living, there's so many people. I think refugees are people who are just labeled as you know, labeled in numbers and like are not given and not recognized as humans. And I think I wonder if, you know, we could present them. And I don't know how. And I think that's where artists come. But I think they need their voices to be heard. They need their stories to be shared. And I don't know how it could be done, but that's something that I feel that we should show, especially about refugee children.
I think we've just figured out the next project after you graduate, hopefully. We need to work on that. We need to make it happen. So I want to thank all of you for being here for such a special evening. And please join me in thanking both Malala and Shirin.
Thank you.
Thank you.